Let's go ahead and dive right into it. So thank you. This is the first of our Changelog webinar series where we're going over recent changes to Checkly. We have a couple of slightly older ones that I'm going to talk about second, just to make sure that they're up and available in video form. But with me is Maria. Maria, feel free to introduce yourself to the people and to those watching the video a little later, and tell them what you do for the
Hi,
Checkly team.
everyone. Yeah, this is Maria. I'm a product manager here at Checkly, and yeah, I'm responsible for our observability efforts mostly, and also looking into playwright storage options really soon.
Awesome. I love that. And so you're here to talk to us about this very generalized feature called Checkly traces. So let's dive into it.
Yeah. So you're saying very generalized feature Checkly traces, because of course
Or
it,
just
it
the
has
name.
many
Just
layers to it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
just the name is like doesn't always tell you what it does on the tin. But yeah, please.
Right. So we're aggregating all the data that we receive from OpenTelemetry from our customers and then connecting it to every check that they're running. What does this mean effectively? Of course, yeah, you get a whole review page like the one I'm showing you right now. And here you can see the health of the spans underneath in your system. And yeah, one of the things that we recently added so that people could look and see it is the very detailed view once you open it up. Okay, so let's go into the beginning. We have the OpenTelemetry demo website running here. As you can see, of course, OpenTelemetry being in telemetry sells the best telescopes to see the world closer, which is exactly what they do, right? Like they let you see what's going on within your system, your applications and services. So yeah, I have several checks running against the OpenTelemetry demo. You can see them here. I have them grouped. There is one check in the products catalog, the data ads, the checkout, currency, and homepage. And seems that the currency API is going well, but checkout isn't working lately. And we don't know why. When we come into the check, of course, it tells us, okay, it failed. And we can see that clicking on a product and adding to the cart generated an error. The error was a timeout. Of course, it waited to see your order is complete and it never showed up. And we don't have a clue of what's happening here or what might be failing specifically. And of course, we have our test steps and it's expecting to be visible, of course. But then when we come into the traces, and of course, this has a lot of traces within them, we see there are a few errors, right? So we come in here, we filter, okay, let's see the 14 errors that this trace has associated with it. And then we can start looking into what happened. So you can see that it went through prod, hotel demo, shipping, then it tried to get the item in the list for shipping, and the currency seems timing out too. Let's see the errors. That's a 500. Okay, yeah. So I might not know the right thing that I need to fix, but there's something going on in the checkout, and that thing is affecting shipping, get quote, and the currency code quote once we get there.
I love to
And that
see
should
that.
give enough.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. I was
go
just
for
saying,
it.
I love to see the change here, right? We started with, hey, we have this route failing. We know that this isn't working for customers, and that's always been the Checkly benefit, right? That we know a problem, something's not working for users, hopefully before even the user reports it. Fantastic. But previously we just said, hey, we had a timeout on this, route on this page. But now we can say, hey, this service within our own stack is the thing that appears to be erroring, which tells us so much more, helps us know who to actually wake up to deal with a problem.
Yeah, at least that that's the goal, right? Like if you're getting woken up, it's not only who gets to be woken up, right? But where do I start looking and where the information is at. And
Mm-hmm.
this way you're seeing the traces correlated right within your tag where you get to see, okay, yeah, there is a problem with the shipping service and providing the quote, and that's why checkout isn't working. And from there on, yeah, that's where we need to start looking into. And yeah, one cool thing that we recently added also is part where you can link this to one of your colleagues, of course, right? So if you're investigating with your team, you come in here, there's the detail view you can see here on the right side, and you can share that with your colleague and it will take you directly to that span.
Oh,
So yeah.
I love this. I think, I do talk about being woken up at night because I spent 6 years as developer dealing with these, incident responses. But one of the things I've always liked about Checkly is that it's as if, one of our actual QA people found the problem, right? Oh, they had the inspector open, they've got a full browser trace, but here's this other piece that, is so big, is like, where do you see it? Where do you see the error? And so being able to be like, hey, this is the span, go look right here, this will give you that detail. Very, very nice to have.
Yeah. So then, yeah, of course, one of the other things that we've surfaced recently, thanks to our telemetry integration, is let me see, the fact that we're surfacing the top three error spans within your check. And of course, in this scenario, you can see that shipping is failing most often, as well as shipping service get quote. So this is where I would start looking. This is the first get request that gets you there. And yeah, one other thing that might be interesting within this view is that you get to see it also for things that might be yeah, not failing as often, but it still have an error every now and then that you need to look into. And you will see always that there is like the span that is failing with the same error, and we will link to the last check run that had that error specifically, so that you're always looking at the last occurrence of it. And yeah, one other thing that I think is interesting is that, yeah, of course, if you're surfacing events through OpenTelemetry, you will see them here as exceptions, because sometimes there's more information depending on how auto instrumentation set it up or how you set it up. Information might be here outputted as exception events. And yeah, this is mostly what I wanted to talk about because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, no, I love to see, especially, seeing traces get implemented from the beginning. This really neat to see how interconnected this data is and how easy it is to get a quick view now. Yeah, this thing of, hey, you have an error on this span just kind of infrequently is big, right? Because we've all seen these behaviors where, the user path works okay, but there's just this occasional error, maybe on a non-critical part of this that we want to identify early. Fantastic. So, very briefly, for people who have not dived into traces at all, what is the process like to get this installed, to get, initial data reported?
Okay, so there are three steps that you need to follow. The first one is setting up instrumentation in your application. Like if you haven't done so, I recommend using the OpenTelemetry SDK for the language of your application and starting there. If you have it, then you probably have already instrumented somewhere or the collector set up. So first step, instrumentation. The second one is coming to the Checkly website into account settings, selecting traces, and generating an OTel API key here. You get this API key and this endpoint, and you feed these to your processor configuration. And the third is coming into Checkly and seeing the traces flow in as
Before,
you're running your checks.
before I ask my sort of scripted normal questions that we rehearse, I actually have a genuine question, which is that beta thing, is that available to all users now? Or is it not available to everyone
Yes,
before we go GA?
this is available to everyone before we go to GA, which we
Fantastic.
will go very soon. So I would love for more people to join the beta as it is right now. Yeah.
And I think definitely all the people who are attending live, but possibly even the people watching on video later, very likely you are a member of our Checkly Slack. But if you do hop in and take a look at the Checkly traces, for sure do join that Slack. We look at single thing that gets said there, and if anybody has feedback, of course, we're very excited to see that.
Definitely.
Fantastic. So yeah, on installation, if you want to see how to do that, linked down in the video notes below, and for those attending live, you'll get this in an email. I will link to the video where I set all this up in about 3 minutes. It's very, very quick. to get set up the first time, and then also detailed documentation where it's actually like step by step. If you're already
Right.
using OpenTelemetry, it's like as nothing, it's just a little config. Even if you're not, this is a great entry point to say, hey, let's start doing a few traces on the back end and sending them over to Checkly. And one of the things I think is important, we didn't dive into the architecture, but this is a very, very lean OpenTelemetry integration. This is only sending the traces that actually are kicked off by Checkly, which is just fantastic.
Yes, I think that's the best part of it, right? Like the egress that you're generated is tiny compared to the volume, and it will help you catch issues and solve them before it hits your customers.
Awesome. Well, I have a couple of other features I want to talk about, mainly just sort of present on. But before we do that, for our live attendees, do we have any questions about Checkly traces, stuff that you would like to see next, or just questions about the feature? I did enable chat, so feel free to send a chat or use the Q&A system as well. Otherwise, I will get started with my piece.
Nice. We, oh yeah, I was going to say that we now support base URL in Playwright projects everywhere, and that the Prometheus input has increased its rate limit to 50 requests per minute, thanks
Oh,
to a
neat.
cache underneath, which
Oh,
helps
neat.
build in internal dashboards. So yeah.
And if you want to see, as I think folks checking this video can imagine, we have a detailed in-text changelog that goes out via email and is available on our site as well. So there's also individual playwright methods that get enabled or new features that get enabled to support current features. We don't get a chance to go through every one of those on this video series, but yeah, do check that out there because we do get into detail about what's actually changing. Okay, so there's two features that I want to talk about, and you should be seeing my screen with visual regression checks and
I do,
degraded
yeah.
states. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Just have to have that sanity check, as we all know. And so I just want to talk about these two features. They are not too intimately connected, but they're just two things I want to make sure, especially for long-standing users of Checkly, that they're aware of. The first is visual regression monitoring. So, visual regression monitoring, when you go and look it up, it is supported in the core of the Playwright project. You will see a message that says, hey, don't do this as your only checks, right? Visual regression monitoring is looking for pixel changes on your pages. That's not what your users are looking for, right? Your users are not saying, oh my gosh, the margins are slightly different on this text. It can be interesting to get those alerts. It can matter to you, but it is not sort of the way to start with making checks. I speak from having seen the birth of synthetic monitoring and seeing people start with these screenshot comparisons that generate all these alerts they're not expecting. But there are reasons to go in and want to have this kind of visual comparison saying, hey, I see this change on the page. And you're seeing demoed here, or you're just a screenshot here of what that interface is in Checkly, where you're able to pull a slider and say here's what's different. And this is a great example of something that we would care about, right? Hey, we had one of the resources on the page change. It looks different. We're concerned, and we get this very nice visual comparator to say, hey, we're sliding back and forth. We're seeing, hey, we have something wrong here. In this case, right, it looks like we actually have the language completely wrong. And I will just say again, not to down talk this great feature. That is something you could generally catch without a visual comparison, right? If it's changing language, but we there are of course reasons that we want to just say, hey, just take a screenshot and let's know what's changed. So the requirements are very simple. Just that you're using the latest or a recent version of the Checkly CLI. I believe there have been some updates since, and that you're using the Checkly runtime. That runtime is set down in the bottom of your test script interface. You can also set it in the config, and it's important to note that if you wrote a test a long time ago, it is still running on that old runtime, and in general, that's comforting. That's what we expect. It matters for something like visual regression, right? Because we do really want this thing to render exactly the same way every time. Because very slight changes to rendering agents can change things like the anti-aliasing around text and can cause a lot of pixels to shift. So you can set Speaking of, hey, pixels are shifting, you can set a ratio of pixels to shift, how many pixels can be different, and what counts as a change, right? Hey, how much, can a color shift before we say, hey, that's changed? And you can play with these locally or play with these on the CLI to see kind of how that affects it. And you get, as you can see in the little video here, you get this kind of nice visual highlight view that shows you, hey, this in red is counting as a differentiated pixel. Um, so if you have any questions about this as we're zipping through the config for it or sort of what's available, feel free to just drop those in the Q&A. I just want to cover sort of what's configurable about it so that we have a good sense of what it's able to do for us and what it's able to achieve. By default, animations are turned off. This is true in all of your checks that by default CSS animations are deactivated, which is generally good, right? We don't want to be chasing around a button or looking at these different elements, but you can enable them, perhaps with a manual way to say, hey, I want to wait for this animation to finish. And of course, some things on a page do change. So we all have that thought of like, wait, I have a recent news section on my page, and that's always different, right? You can mask that out. And apologies, I noticed this in rehearsal that I didn't have a screenshot of this, but it looks really cool. When you get a screenshot, you get a nice purple box over like, hey, this part was masked out. You can also say, hey, I only want to load this component and take a screenshot of this component. This is covered in the documentation for screenshotting. There's one last idea I want to make sure we cover about this, just because it's kind of fundamental to writing really complex or really interesting checks with Checkly, where the concept of a golden file that says, hey, this is the file that I'm going to compare back to when I run my test. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that, but it can't put in this position where we have a way more brittle test where, we're getting alerts, we're getting woken up, and we're saying, oh, right, I forgot to update that file from 6 years ago, right? So, a screenshot's a great place to start where it's like, hey, we have to take a screenshot at one point and say, we know this is good. And so you can just trigger that from the web UI when you're running a script. You can also upload a file and say, hey, I want that one to be the one that we compare to. You maybe shouldn't do feed in that file for comparison if you're doing a visual regression check, right? Because we just talked about rendering engines, right? So the issue becomes, hey, this text is never going to render identically on dissimilar browsers. And so you're always going to have these slight differences. And so that may not make the most sense. It might make sense if you're loading one component or you load one image as a component and compare it. In that case, maybe just an image checksum or something else clever to do. But it is good to know that's available for doing a text comparison. So it's really nice to be able to say, hey, I have this JSON, it's ideal, and I want to compare to it. The nice thing about using a golden file system within Playwright is that you can set explicitly to say, hey, I want to update all of those snapshots. And this includes an update of a snapshot of, say, a JSON file that you download. And you say, hey, I want to compare it at this point. So you could say after you deploy and after you're happy with your deployment, you have a step where you say, hey, go through and update my snapshots on all my tests because I know we're working right now and I want to go back and have all these compare it. And so I have a video and a blog article about this as well, using that snapshotting with JSON objects to say, hey, I want to compare these back. I'm gonna gloss over this. Just FYI, you can change the viewport and user agent. So not too surprisingly, you can come back and say, hey, I want to try and get a mobile version of the page to do that comparison. That's nice to do as well for our other tests as well. Okay, questions about that? Otherwise, I'm going to slide right into degraded states. Perfect, folks. If you're watching this on YouTube later, feel free to drop a comment with a question down below. I get like an email about that immediately, so I'm happy to hop back in. And Stefan, who does all our great Playwright videos, I read those as well. So, we all, when we first create our tests, which we turn into checks that we run on our site continuously, we all have these realizations of, oh, there's something we didn't set up quite the way we'd like. And the false negative where we don't get woken up but when something in fact does break, right, it's very bad. Usually the first thing that we try to fix. But that sort of over time we discover those. But the false positives are a little bit annoying too, where we get, hey, this image loaded slowly on this page. We had the example of like an error span from the checkly traces where we say, hey, we had one span and hit an error. We may or may not want to have gotten notified about that right away, right? Oh, recent activity isn't loading in this panel fast enough. Well, we care about that, but we don't necessarily want to get woken up with an alert about that. And in fact, when you go to write, this is another thing you get warned about on the Playwright site. When you go to write a test that says, hey, check for this image to load, only give it, 200 milliseconds to load, you'll see a warning in the API documentation like, hey, this is going to result in a brittle test that will be broken. And when you wake up and you say, oh, this loaded slowly for 5 minutes and now it's loading fine, you're not going to be best pleased, right? When you hopped up to check that test. So we say, hey, there's this middle state in between here. And there's one other problem with this. When we do an assertion in Playwright and we say, hey, I want this to load within 200 milliseconds, and it doesn't do it, the test comes up as failed and the rest of the lines don't run, right? So the question of, well, does this image loading slowly, does it prevent you from checking out? Does it prevent the other buttons from loading? We don't know, right? Because once an assertion has failed, we just stop running. So we've introduced this state in the Checkly UI of degraded, where when, yes, the user was able to put things in their cart, was able to check out, was able to do everything that they needed to do, but a few things didn't look right. They were too slow. They, helpful images didn't load, tooltips didn't load, whatever else that you defined as, hey, this is degraded. And Maria reminded me that one of the biggest things about this is it can have its own alert policies. So yeah, perfect example that you gave during rehearsal, Maria, of oh, when you wake up in the morning, you check Slack, hey, a bunch of images loaded slowly overnight for some users. Oh, good to know, right? But we didn't get the email, we didn't get the pager duty, we didn't get the rootly alert, right, about this problem, which makes sense. So you can have separate policies. Now you can do that with alert policies, you can put things in a separate alert group. But one of the other nice things is that this uses a soft assertion in Playwright so that when one of these fails, it will just note it and continue on with the rest of the test. And I think the soft assertion thing is really critical because it is the most common sort of user issue that I see is that they have a lot of hard assertions and that therefore the test isn't even completing. And they really are things it's like, yes, I do care about that. I do want that to load at this time, but it is not necessarily like, hey, the user can't do what they need to do. So once you have a soft assertion that is not passed, you can call this mark check as degraded. You can call this mark check as degraded, whether or not you've had a soft assertion fail. Just the soft assertion will help decorate that degraded check. And so yeah, it's mark check as degraded, does what it says in the tin with a message. And then the check will be marked as degraded if it has not failed any assertions. If assertions have failed, it's listed as failing. So you can add this in at will to say, hey, on this standard, I want to mark this as degraded. This is a full example of the code that will do this. So in this case, we have a soft assertion here. We want to get this back in this amount of time with a message to say, hey, this is what the problem is if it doesn't do that. So expect that soft. So in this case, right, the check will fail if a 200 status code comes back. If it doesn't come back as 200. But it will fail a soft assertion if one of the APIs responds in less than 200 milliseconds. So very short timeline that we're expecting it to come back. And then we're saying, hey, if it raised any errors, go ahead and mark it as degraded. So yeah, this is just one more channel, one way to be a little less stressed and have a few more levels of concern that you can raise from the UI. Was there other stuff that was forward instead of back? Was there other stuff that we wanted to cover about degraded tests or about visual regression, Maria?
No, I don't think so. Like, yeah, just what you mentioned that, of course, yeah, the graded doesn't need to page you
Yeah.
is good, right? The graded are the things that you go through regular maintenance duties and you fix it slowly, right? That there will be so many of these, either coming from telemetry or from your tests. Then yeah, you once you get there, you can fix them.
Yeah, if you want to
And
dive in further to this, I suggest checking out our material on auto weighting. We just added some material to the Learn documentation about this. And I'm today I think I'm publishing a guide on assertions in Playwright, that'll give some more detail into how assertions work in detail. But yeah, please do dive into that if you want to get a little deeper on like what's happening there fundamentally. But yeah, what else did you have? I heard that you had more. I'm excited.
No, I think the only other thing that I wanted to mention, and it just came to my mind because you showed a screenshot from a runtime on 2023-09. Okay, so we've got the latest runtime in. It's in beta. It's 2024-09 for
Okay.
anyone that wants to use it. You can enable it in labs. And of course, it changes some of the packages and dependencies that come with it to be more up to date. But it's, as of last week, also running and using Playwright version 1.48, which is the latest version. And it's the one that will hide those, to me, very annoying continue route or continue fulfill from the network. Like it's going to be putting them in the network tab now, which
Oh,
means that there will be less noise in the test steps for
a,
people using the new runtime.
a little bit cleaner. Yeah, it is true that those
Yeah.
route dot continue steps are the reason that I put in manual steps all the time, to keep that a little cleaned up. So yeah, do keep an eye on this runtime down here. Again, you can enable the most recent version in labs, but there's like a 2024-01. I apologize, I didn't have this up in front of me.
Yeah, 2024-09 live.
Uh,
Yeah.
there's a previous version that's also stable that's later than this, I
Yes.
believe.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
also a 2024 one. Yeah.
but if you want more detail on those changes, do check out our text change log available on the site, also available for sign up via email. And yeah, again, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments down below the video. Thank you so much for the URL. That
You
URL,
got
of
it.
course, I will also include in the YouTube description. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. If we have final questions, go ahead and drop in the chat. Otherwise, we are going to close it up, folks. Thank you so much for attending.